nation where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.
Now it's time for America to bind the wounds of division. We have to get together. To all Republicans and Democrats and independents across this nation, I say it is time for us to come together as one united people. It's time.
Donald Trump went on then to make this promise to America.
I pledge to every citizen of our land that I will be president for all Americans, and this is so important to me. For those who have chosen not to support me in the past, of which there were a few people, I'm reaching out to you for your guidance and your help so that we can work together and unify our great country.
And picking up on his campaign slogan, Make America Great Again, Donald Trump said he would start work immediately.
Ours was not a campaign, but rather an incredible and great movement made up of millions of hardworking men and women who love their country and want a better, brighter future for themselves and for their family. It's a movement comprised of Americans from all races, religions, backgrounds, and beliefs who want and expect our government to serve the people, and serve the people it will. Working together, we will begin the urgent task of rebuilding our nation and renewing the American dream.
If there was one soundbite to take out of Donald Trump's speech, it was this one.
The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about personality, but in terms of Trump's policy, he gave this indication of his priorities.
We are going to fix our inner cities and rebuild our highways, bridges, tunnels, airports, schools, hospitals. We're going to rebuild our infrastructure.
And for those watching and listening around the world, President-elect Trump had this message.
I want to tell the world community that while we will always put America's interests first, we will deal fairly with everyone, all people and all other nations. We will seek common ground, not hostility, partnership, not conflict.
That was the distinctive voice of Donald Trump on the morning of Wednesday, the 9th of November 2016. He was, of course, elected President of the United States of America, having stood against Hillary Rodham Clinton, who would have been the first female president. She's been the Vice President and is, of course, the wife of ex-President Bill Clinton. Yeah, there's been a huge amount of shock over this result, mainly from left-wing campaigners, certainly in Britain. Similar to what happened with Brexit, they just couldn't believe the result that happened. In the end of the day, he says certain things, but it's a question of what he does. But he's certainly not a criminal. He's a businessman, and he's had to fight to get to the top. And he's got a lot of tenacity. Hillary Clinton tends not to be criticised by, again, the left. They tend to sort of have a blind spot. I'm not saying they'd approve of her entirely. I mean, she wants to bomb Iran. She said so, but they seem not to criticise her. Like with the EU, they don't criticise the EU. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be in the EU, but it's ridiculous to have that opinion and then say it's a perfect organisation, or not to sort of criticise the way it's run. And there's a lot of dumbing down, I think, nowadays with these kind of very single issue campaigns like vote Remain or vote Clinton. It seems to dumb the argument down to a very simplistic response to many, many different shades of meaning which I think are often the things we need to look at to judge someone. Obviously, the American election is very obvious to say it's an American issue. It's also a global issue, but America has got bigger sort of a Patriot Radio type of media. The most influential, perhaps nowadays, is Infowars.com. There's also the Drudge Report, but it's a slightly more mainstream outfit. And Alex Jones has to some degree become the Trump TV unofficially. That's both entertaining and informative. I mean, the thing about Infowars, I'm a great fan of the show. It's great to have it on in the background when you're doing other work in particular. I think Alan Watts is a bit more of an evening listen. You have to sit down and really take it in. With Infowars you can listen, but it's a bit more of a radio format. And like the old Talk Sports station in Britain, there's sometimes a bit of a tabloid edge to that. You can kind of go along with some of it in a kind of not ironic way, but you kind of listen to it, but you know it's coming from a certain angle, a certain amount of self-expression going on there in the way they put things over. It's not quite as academic as some ways of doing things might be. But he became very much a kind of mouthpiece for the Trump campaign, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But bear in mind, in America they have a lot of issues like guns and stuff that don't really figure in British elections, and that kind of is an issue in America. And so a lot of the stuff he talks about with Trump is going to relate to US culture that we might have an interest in vicariously, but it's not directly going to influence the outcome as far as we're concerned. But I think the best person won. I mean, it's generally been seen as perhaps neither candidate being ideal, and I think that's probably true. Certainly of the two, I'm glad Trump got in. I don't like some of the things he said about the environment. I don't, go along with the CO2 equals global warming concept. I used to, but I don't anymore. So I don't have a problem with him not believing in climate change being man-made. But I am a bit worried about him cutting back on the Environmental Agency in America. But obviously, any election, you get all sorts of things said, and as in Britain, all sorts of things are said that don't always come to pass in quite the same way that they assume they will. But I do think there's been a lot of exaggerated shock horror at the result. And in the end of the day, it was an election, and someone had to win. And as with Brexit, there had to be a decision. And to then go, oh, this is a terrible decision, it's wrong. And there's been these demonstrations in America against the result, and there was someone chanting. There's a phrase, a kind of meme or kind of hive mind type chant that goes on, which I've heard for real in Brighton before at similar, much smaller demos. It's something like, tell me what democracy looks like, this is what democracy looks like, and it gets yelled out, and it's like, tell me what democracy looks like, this is what democracy looks like, and you're looking at a crowd chanting, and you're thinking, well, yeah, okay, there's more to democracy or civil society than just voting, but democracy itself, as we understand it, it relates to voting. It's all it relates to. It doesn't really relate to anything else. I mean, you could have another word for being involved with society, but to chant out after a result of a democratic election something like that, it seems very naive. I'd have more respect for that view if they said the vote had been rigged, but then they would then have to take on the mantle of conspiracy theorists and say that elections are rigged sometimes, and generally speaking these hive mind left wing type demonstrations don't do that. They generally accept the mainstream view while at the same time criticising the result it gives, which to me seems a contradictory position. I could fully appreciate if someone thinks there's a conspiracy to cover up something and then has a go at it being non-democratic. That I get that totally, I'd respect that view, but when they sort of think it's a straight election with Brexit or Trump and then say that's not democratic, that just seems ridiculous. So I'll just put a few thoughts out here. I'm sure my brother and counterpart Martin said his own thoughts. Just to mention, we are bringing back the printed version of the magazine. Well, in fact, the printed version of the information, I mean. There's only ever been a printed version of the magazine. It'll be limited distribution. I'm still not quite sure how I'm going to put it out. There'll be physical copies printed, but it'll be a very short run. It may be available through Etsy.com. But I'm going to look at maybe putting it on either a print-on-demand website or somewhere where you can download a PDF, and it'll be about 24 pages long, A5 format, which is kind of a small pocket-sized format. So it's just a thin zine really, with black and white pictures and mainly text, and it kind of goes into more depth on some of these issues, maybe and maybe not. We put out things on here that are quite long, particularly when we put out speeches and events we go to, but there's something about the written word, you could ponder it more, and also you can carry a magazine around with you easily. I know there are MP3 players and stuff nowadays, but there's still something very nice about having a magazine you can read, and you can leave them around or give them to someone. It costs pennies to print, and it's nice because you really do distribute something that can then be found and come upon accidentally. And it's all we're really trying to do is put out some alternative culture, and we've got to keep that alive. But yeah, just to say about Trump again, I don't want to give the impression we're some right-wing outfit that are condemning the left. I've been involved with left-wing groups and environmental groups for over 20 years now, but I've seen the limitations, and I'm afraid it's often the point that they are a hive mind group, increasingly so, and when these sort of events happen, it's a predictable kind of response, and that's where I find them very, very disappointing. I'd much rather they said something like, okay Trump, you got in, well done, but now please care about the environment, or care about equality and stuff like that. And a lot of what he says is concerned certainly with those things, but it's a different approach. It's more of an American libertarian approach to it rather than a socialist approach. They probably meet somewhere in the middle, like the two railway lines that were once built across America and had to be joined up somewhere in the centre. You hope they join up, but I'd certainly would support, lobbying of Trump in a respectful way, to have him rethink one or two things, and give him support where he's said good stuff. Again, we just don't hear the fact that he doesn't want to start wars, yet Hillary Clinton has actually said, I want to bomb Iran, and Alex Jones played that clip of her even saying it on his shows, so I've heard that from her own mouth, so it's not rhetoric. So we'll have to see how things go. Obviously he's not inaugurated as such until in January, I think maybe January the 20th, around that time anyway, and hopefully he'll be safe from assassinations and things till then, and we'll have to see what happens afterwards. Is he a genuine maverick, a genuine outsider, or is he another perhaps plausible tool of a new world order? I don't know. There's always a little bit of both going on. You've got to somehow be allowed to do what you do. We've had other presidents that have been good as well. I mean, look at Kennedy, he got in, but look what happened to him, So we'll have to see how it goes. But it's certainly been quite something to follow, and I think the air's cleared a little bit now. At least we know with Brexit and Trump what the situation is, and we'll have to just see how it unfolds. But I do think, I say to the more progressive left or liberal groups, you've got to accept the result. I mean, I was very unsure about the Brexit, which way to vote, and like I said, I almost voted to remain at one point, thinking it would be chaos if it happened. But ultimately the EU has been such a terrible version of what might have been a good idea that it's best to vote out. That may even get them to reform it, but sometimes you just have to say, look, it's like going on strike. You withdraw your labour, you withdraw your involvement with something if it gets that bad, and that's what the EU has got to, particularly on the financial side of not having accounts and stuff like that. It's verging on criminal, really. If that was anybody running a company doing that, they'd be they're being caught basically. So sometimes you have to just make your feelings known in a way that's powerful and has an impact. It isn't just a question of waving a banner around. But I do hope in both cases that groups that have their own concerns do carry on lobbying and don't just put over wholly negative reactions to what have, like it or not, been democratic processes.
The information where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.